If I'm wrong, you can laugh all night, the waitress said quietly. But if I'm right, Mr. Caldwell has less than 5 minutes. The laughter came instantly. Sharp, confident, dismissive. Three men in tailored black suits exchanged amused looks across the security command station hidden behind the ballroom walls of the Monarch Grand Hotel. One of them leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "She's a waitress," he muttered. "Not Secret Service." More chuckles followed. The room glowed with dozens of surveillance monitors. Camera feeds covered every hallway, elevator, entrance, and loading dock across the 40-story luxury hotel. Tonight was one of the biggest nights in Manhattan. Investors had flown in from California, Texas, Illinois, and Florida. Reporters crowded the lobby. Executives filled the grand ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most homes. In less than an hour, billionaire entrepreneur Ethan Caldwell was expected to finalize a deal that financial networks had been discussing for weeks. The agreement could reshape an entire industry. Every detail had been planned, every guest screened, every route secured. At least that was what the security team believed. Standing near the doorway was Claire Whitmore, 26 years old, blonde hair tied neatly behind her head, black server uniform, white gloves. Nothing about her appearance suggested authority. Nothing suggested expertise. She looked exactly like what everyone assumed she was. Just another employee carrying trays through expensive rooms. But Claire wasn't looking at the people. She was looking at the screens. Her blue eyes moved slowly from one camera feed to the next. Calm, focused, watching. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Inside, the air hummed with conversation, radio chatter, and the distant sound of champagne glasses touching together. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. Claire had learned long ago that major failures rarely announced themselves. They whispered. They hid inside ordinary details. One of the guards noticed she was still standing there. "You waiting for an autograph or something?" he asked. The others laughed again. Claire ignored them. Her attention remained fixed on a monitor displaying the Western Service Corridor. Something felt wrong. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just wrong. The same uneasy feeling she got whenever pieces of a puzzle refused to fit together. She stepped closer to the screen. "The West Hallway camera is going to fail," she said. "Probably within the next few minutes." The room fell silent for half a second before another wave of laughter erupted. "And how exactly would a waitress know that?" someone asked. Claire didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained on the feed. The image flickered so briefly that most people would never notice it. A fraction of a second. Then it returned. Perfectly normal. She glanced at the digital clock mounted above the monitors. Then she looked back at the screen. Calm. Unshaken. "Because it already started," she said. This time nobody laughed. Not because they believed her. Because for the first time, they realized she sounded absolutely certain. The security room remained quiet for several seconds after Claire spoke. Not respectful silence. Uncertain silence. The kind that appears when confidence collides with doubt. One of the supervisors finally broke it with a short laugh. "You saw one flicker and suddenly you are an expert?" he asked. The others relaxed. The tension disappeared. Smirks returned. Radios crackled. Coffee cups lifted from desks. The world continued exactly as before. Claire said nothing. She had never been good at arguing. Experience had taught her that people rarely changed their minds because of words. They changed because of evidence. She simply nodded once and stepped away from the monitors. The supervisor watched her leave and shook his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Every big event attracts someone who thinks they know better." Nobody noticed that Claire never reacted to the criticism. She never defended herself. Never raised her voice. Never looked offended. She moved through the service hallway with the same quiet pace she always used. The polished marble floors reflected the warm glow of the chandeliers hanging above. Guests filled every corner of the Monarch Grand Hotel. Laughter drifted from the ballroom. Live music floated through the air. Servers carried silver trays loaded with sparkling water and appetizers. It looked perfect, almost too perfect. Claire stepped into a staff corridor hidden behind the main event space. From the pocket of her apron, she pulled out a small black notebook. The cover was worn from years of use. Inside were hundreds of observations written in neat handwriting. Dates, times, details, patterns, things most people never noticed. She opened to a blank page and wrote 3 words. West Hall camera. Then she wrote the current time. A young server named Hannah walked past carrying folded napkins. "Claire, what are you always writing in that thing?" she asked with a smile. Claire closed the notebook. "Just reminders." Hannah laughed. "You make reminders look like government secrets." Claire smiled politely, but offered nothing more. That was another thing people noticed about her. She listened far more than she spoke. Most assumed she was shy. Some thought she lacked confidence. Neither assumption was true. Claire simply preferred observation over attention. A few minutes later, she entered the ballroom carrying a tray of glasses. The sight inside would have impressed almost anyone. Crystal chandeliers stretched overhead like frozen waterfalls. Massive floral arrangements decorated every corner. Large digital displays projected company logos across the walls. The room glowed with wealth and ambition. Near the center stood Ethan Caldwell. Even from a distance, his presence drew attention. Guests gathered around him constantly. Executives, investors, journalists. Everyone wanted a moment of his time. Ethan handled each conversation with calm professionalism. Confident, focused, precise. Claire watched him only briefly before continuing her work. Then something caught her eye. A maintenance worker pushing a cart near the western entrance. Nothing unusual at first glance. Yet Claire slowed her pace. The uniform looked correct. The badge looked correct. The cart looked correct. But the timing felt wrong. The worker disappeared through a service door marked employees only. Claire turned her head slightly and looked toward the digital clock mounted above the ballroom entrance. Then she looked toward the western corridor. The uneasy feeling returned. Quiet, persistent, familiar. Somewhere beneath the music and conversation, another piece of the puzzle had just moved into place. Most people in the ballroom saw a billionaire. They saw the custom-tailored suit, the executives waiting for his attention, the cameras following his every step. They saw success measured in numbers too large to imagine. Claire saw something different. She saw a man carrying the weight of an entire room. Ethan Caldwell stood beneath the crystal chandeliers as if he belonged there, yet his eyes never stopped moving. While guests admired the luxury around them, Ethan monitored schedules, conversations, and timing. Every handshake mattered. Every introduction served a purpose. The agreement scheduled for later that evening represented nearly 2 years of negotiations. Hundreds of employees across multiple states were waiting for the outcome. Entire business divisions depended on it. Failure was not an option. That was one reason his security team was so confident. They had protected executives, politicians, celebrities, and international investors. Tonight seemed straightforward compared to many of their previous assignments. The ballroom remained secure. Entry points remained monitored. Credentials had been checked repeatedly throughout the day. Everything appeared under control. Claire continued serving guests while quietly observing the room. Her tray felt light in her hands. Her attention remained somewhere else. The maintenance worker she had noticed earlier had not returned. That alone was unusual. Most hotel maintenance routes followed predictable patterns. Employees appeared, completed tasks, and moved on. This man had vanished into a service corridor and never reappeared. She reached a table near the back of the ballroom where several investors were discussing market projections. Their voices blended into the background noise. Beyond them stood 2 members of Ethan's security detail. Both appeared relaxed. One checked messages on a tablet while the other spoke into an earpiece. Neither looked concerned. Claire glanced toward the western side of the building again. A large decorative wall concealed part of the service access area from public view. Most guests never noticed it. Claire noticed everything. Her notebook remained tucked safely inside her apron pocket. She could almost feel its weight. Every observation she recorded followed the same rule. Details mattered. Small inconsistencies often pointed toward larger problems. A server rushed past carrying sparkling water. Another crossed the ballroom with fresh linens. Event coordinators moved through the crowd checking schedules. Everything looked normal, yet the uneasy feeling refused to leave. Near the main stage, Ethan accepted congratulations from a group of investors visiting from Texas. He smiled politely, thanked them, answered questions. Then his attention shifted toward a large digital display mounted above the ballroom entrance. It lasted less than a second. Most people would never have noticed. Claire did. Ethan had seen something. Not enough to concern him, just enough to register. The display flickered briefly before returning to normal. One blink, then nothing. Claire stopped walking. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The same type of flicker. The same type of interruption. First the camera feed. Now the display system. Tiny disturbances. Separate events if viewed individually. A pattern if viewed together. Across the room, a security supervisor noticed her standing still again. He rolled his eyes and shook his head. Claire ignored him. Her focus remained on the clock above the ballroom entrance. Minutes continued slipping away. Somewhere inside the hotel, pieces were moving into position. She could not yet see the full picture, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The picture was getting clearer. The confidence inside the security team came from years of success. They had protected governors, corporate leaders, and international guests. They trusted their procedures because those procedures had never failed them before. In the command room, the supervisors reviewed checklists with practiced efficiency. Every entrance showed green status indicators. Every credential scan matched the approved guest list. Every report pointed to the same conclusion. The event was secure. One guard leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "This is probably the easiest assignment we have had all month," he said. Several others agreed. Their attention drifted between camera feeds and routine updates. No one seemed concerned about the tiny interruptions that had appeared throughout the evening. No one except Claire. She moved through the ballroom carrying a tray of sparkling water while quietly tracking details. The maintenance workers still had not returned. The western corridor remained unusually quiet. The digital display near the entrance had flickered twice more. Small events, easy to dismiss. Yet together they formed a pattern she could not ignore. Near the stage, event coordinators prepared for Ethan Caldwell's upcoming presentation. Staff members adjusted lighting levels. Technicians verified microphones. Guests continued arriving. The energy inside the room grew stronger with each passing minute. Everyone focused on what was about to happen. Almost nobody paid attention to what was happening around them. Claire approached a service station hidden behind a decorative wall. From there, she could see part of the western hallway without attracting attention. Her eyes moved carefully across the area. A catering employee pushed a cart through the corridor. A hotel manager walked past carrying paperwork. Then she noticed something else. A door at the far end of the hallway closed slowly. Not unusual by itself. But Claire had been watching that section for nearly 15 minutes. Nobody had entered. Nobody had exited. Yet somehow the door had moved. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear. Awareness. The sensation appeared whenever her instincts connected pieces before her mind fully understood them. She checked the time again. Minutes continued disappearing. Across the ballroom, Ethan spoke with a group of investors from Chicago. His calm demeanor reassured everyone around him. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, smiled when appropriate. The room naturally revolved around him. Meanwhile, his security team remained convinced they controlled every variable. One supervisor even joked about the waitress who believed she could predict system failures. The others laughed. Confidence had become certainty. Certainty had become blindness. Claire removed her small notebook once more. She turned to a clean page and began writing. Camera flicker. Display interruption. Missing maintenance worker. Unexplained door movement. West corridor. She stared at the list. For separate observations. For quiet warnings. The pieces were aligning faster now. Then her eyes widened slightly. A realization surfaced. Small. Precise. Dangerous. She looked toward the ballroom clock. Then toward the western hallway. Then back toward the clock. For the first time that evening, Claire was no longer wondering whether something was wrong. She was beginning to understand exactly where the problem would appear. Claire remained motionless beside the service station while the ballroom continued to sparkle around her. The music played softly. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed. To everyone else, it was another successful corporate event. To Claire, the room was beginning to feel like a clock counting down towards something unseen. She looked again at the list inside her notebook. For observations. For irregularities. None of them serious on their own. Together, they formed a pattern she could no longer dismiss. The maintenance worker. The camera flicker. The display interruptions. The unexplained movement near the western corridor. Her eyes drifted toward the far side of the ballroom. A row of decorative panels concealed access to several service areas. Most guests would never know they existed. That was exactly why they mattered. Claire slipped the notebook back into her apron and quietly walked toward the corridor. She moved with the natural pace of an employee doing her job. No rush. No drama. No reason to attract attention. The hallway beyond the ballroom felt different immediately. Quieter. Cooler. The sounds of the event faded behind the walls. She passed storage rooms, supply closets, and employee entrances. Everything appeared normal. Yet something felt off. Then she saw it. A small maintenance cart parked beside a service door. The same cart she had noticed earlier. She approached slowly. No one was nearby. The tools looked ordinary. The uniform jacket draped over the handle looked ordinary. But one detail caught her attention. The identification badge clipped to the jacket displayed a red stripe. Claire frowned. Hotel maintenance badges used blue stripes. She knew because she saw them every day. She glanced toward the service door. Closed. Silent. Her pulse quickened slightly. Not fear. Confirmation. Another piece sliding into place. She stepped back and looked at the hallway clock mounted above the emergency exit sign. Time continued moving. The event schedule showed Ethan Caldwell's presentation beginning soon. More guests were arriving by the minute. The ballroom was approaching maximum occupancy. Claire returned toward the main event space. As she entered, she spotted one of the security supervisors speaking with several guards. Their expressions remained relaxed, confident, unconcerned. She hesitated only briefly before approaching. "I need to show you something," she said. The supervisor looked at her and sighed. "Not this again." Claire kept her voice calm. "The maintenance badge in the western corridor is incorrect." One of the guards chuckled. "You are checking employee badges now." Another smiled. "Maybe we should put you in charge of the whole operation." Laughter spread through the group. Claire waited for it to pass. "The badge stripe is the wrong color," she said. "And the maintenance worker does not appear on tonight's staff schedule." The supervisor folded his arms. "You checked the schedule too?" Claire nodded. "Yes." The man shook his head in disbelief. "Listen, the adults are handling security. You focus on serving drinks." The group laughed again. Claire looked from one face to the next. Nobody was listening. Nobody wanted to listen. Confidence had become arrogance. She turned away without another word. Behind her, the conversation resumed immediately. Ahead of her, Ethan Caldwell stepped toward the stage as applause began filling the ballroom. Claire looked at the clock, then toward the western corridor. The uneasy feeling had vanished. In its place was certainty. Something was about to happen, and she was running out of time. Applause rolled across the ballroom as Ethan Caldwell stepped onto the stage. The massive screens behind him illuminated the room with soft blue light. Hundreds of guests turned their attention forward. Cameras flashed. Investors settled into their seats. For everyone else, the evening had finally reached its most important moment. For Claire, the countdown had already begun. She stood near the edge of the ballroom holding an untouched tray, her eyes moving between the stage, the western corridor, and the clock above the entrance. Every instinct told her the same thing. The pattern was complete. The only missing piece was time. Ethan began speaking with the calm confidence that had made him one of the most respected entrepreneurs in the country. His voice carried easily through the ballroom. The audience listened closely. Every word mattered. Every sentence moved the event closer to the signing ceremony scheduled later that evening. Meanwhile, the security team remained exactly where they wanted to be. Relaxed, comfortable, certain. In the command room, several guards watched the camera feeds while joking about the waitress who believed she could predict technical failures. One supervisor even imitated Claire's serious expression, drawing laughter from the others. "Maybe she sees the future," someone joked. More laughter followed. No one noticed the brief flicker that crossed one of the western hallway monitors. It lasted less than a second. Then it disappeared. A minute later, it happened again. Claire saw it immediately from a display screen mounted near the ballroom entrance. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, from recognition. The system was behaving exactly as she expected. She walked toward the security command room one final time. The supervisor looked up as she entered. His smile vanished the moment he saw her. "You again?" he asked. Claire ignored the irritation in his voice. "Please check the western corridor feed," she said calmly. "Now." The room exchanged tired looks. One guard sighed dramatically and pulled up the requested camera. The image appeared normal. Empty hallway. Closed doors. Clean floors. Nothing unusual. The supervisor folded his arms. "Happy." Claire studied the screen. "Leave it open." "Why?" "Because it will fail." The supervisor laughed. "You keep saying that." Claire looked at the clock on the wall. 8:45. Then back to the monitor. 8:46. Nobody spoke. The room filled with the low hum of equipment and distant radio traffic. Several guards watched simply to prove her wrong. 8:47 arrived. For a moment, nothing happened. The supervisor smirked. One guard began shaking his head. Then the monitor flickered. Once. Twice. The image distorted into static before turning completely black. The room froze. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. The supervisor stared at the dead screen as if willing it to return. Another guard quickly checked system diagnostics. A third grabbed his radio. Across the ballroom, Ethan continued speaking, unaware that something had just changed. Claire never took her eyes off the monitor. Because the failed camera was not the problem. It was only the warning. The silence inside the command room felt heavier than the noise that had filled it moments earlier. The dead monitor remained black. The same screen they had laughed about. The same screen Claire had warned them about. One guard refreshed the feed. Nothing. Another checked the system logs. His confidence faded with every second. The supervisor who had mocked Claire stared at the screen without speaking. For the first time that evening, uncertainty had entered the room. Claire stood quietly near the doorway. She did not look satisfied. She did not look proud. She looked concerned. Because the camera failure was not the victory everyone assumed it was. It was evidence. Nothing more. One of the guards finally turned toward her. "How did you know?" he asked. Claire glanced at the dark monitor. "Because somebody wanted that camera gone." The room became silent again. The supervisor shook his head. "That does not explain how you predicted the timing." Claire hesitated briefly. Her eyes drifted toward the ballroom visible through a small glass window. Ethan Caldwell continued speaking to hundreds of guests who remained unaware of the growing tension behind the scenes. "Patterns," Claire said softly. "Systems always leave clues before they fail." Nobody laughed this time. The words sounded different now. More serious. More credible. A radio crackled suddenly. Security personnel stationed near the western corridor reported unusual activity. Nothing dangerous. Nothing dramatic. Just a series of access requests appearing on internal systems where none should have existed. The supervisor immediately grabbed another monitor. His expression tightened. More irregularities appeared. Small disruptions. Minor errors. Individually insignificant. Together, they painted a troubling picture. Claire felt a familiar sensation settle over her. She had experienced it years ago. The moment when isolated details stopped being random and began revealing intent. Her gaze moved toward the digital clock, then toward the Western service routes displayed on the building map, then toward a separate monitor showing access points throughout the hotel. Suddenly, she understood something that made her stomach tighten. The failed camera had drawn everyone's attention exactly where it was supposed to. "You are looking at the wrong place," she said. The supervisor looked up. "What?" Claire stepped closer to the screens. Her finger pointed toward another section of the building. Not the western hallway. Not the failed camera. A secured corridor leading toward the private conference suite where the final contract documents were scheduled to be signed later that evening. "The camera was the distraction," she said quietly. "Whoever caused it wanted your team focused there." Several guards exchanged uneasy looks. The supervisor immediately checked the corridor feed. Everything appeared normal. Empty hallways. Closed doors. No visible concerns. Yet the certainty in Claire's voice made it difficult to dismiss her. "You are guessing," one guard said. Claire slowly shook her head. "No." Her eyes remained fixed on the monitor. "I think somebody spent the entire evening teaching us where not to look." Across the ballroom, applause erupted as Ethan concluded a major portion of his presentation. Guests smiled. Investors nodded. The evening appeared more successful than ever. But behind the walls, a different story was unfolding. And for the first time, the security team was beginning to realize that the quiet waitress might be the only person who could see it clearly. The command room no longer felt comfortable. The easy confidence that had filled it earlier had disappeared. Screens glowed across the walls. Radios carried short updates. Guards moved with greater urgency. Nobody was laughing anymore. Claire stood beside the building map, while the supervisor studied the secured conference corridor she had identified. According to every available feed, nothing was wrong. The hallway remained empty. The doors remained closed. Every security indicator showed green. Yet the feeling in the room had changed because one uncomfortable fact remained impossible to ignore. Claire had already been right once. The supervisor rubbed his forehead and looked toward her. If the conference corridor is the real target, What do you think happens next? Claire stared at the map. Her answer came immediately. Someone creates another distraction. Several guards exchanged uneasy glances. The logic was difficult to argue with. The failed camera had redirected attention. The unusual maintenance badge had gone unnoticed. The access requests had appeared exactly where security teams were already looking. Every irregularity seemed designed to pull resources away from something else. Claire stepped closer to the display. Her finger traced several routes through the hotel. Service corridors, employee elevators, restricted access points, quiet pathways hidden behind luxury walls. Guests saw chandeliers and marble floors. Employees saw an entirely different building. Most people move through the hotel one way, she said softly. Staff move through another. The supervisor followed her hand across the map. You think someone used employee routes? Claire nodded. I think someone studied the building very carefully. A radio suddenly crackled. A guard stationed near the ballroom reported a temporary issue with a guest credential scanner. Another minor problem. Another small disruption. Several team members immediately turned toward the new report. Claire noticed it instantly. Another distraction. Another pull on their attention. She checked the clock mounted above the monitors. The signing ceremony would begin soon. Investors were already gathering near the private conference suite. Ethan Caldwell had left the stage and was making his way through a series of scheduled meetings before the final agreement. The timing fit too perfectly. Claire reached into her apron pocket and removed her notebook. The supervisor noticed. What are you looking for? She flipped through several pages filled with observations from earlier in the evening. Times, locations, patterns. Then she stopped. Her eyes narrowed slightly. A realization settled into place. Quiet, precise, unavoidable. She looked up from the notebook. The maintenance worker. The supervisor frowned. What about him? Claire pointed toward the conference corridor on the map. We never confirmed where he went. Silence spread through the room. The supervisor immediately turned toward one of the guards. Find every available camera angle connected to that employee route. Fingers moved across keyboards. Feeds appeared one by one. Hallways, elevators, storage rooms, service entrances. Then one guard leaned forward. Wait. The room froze. A grainy camera image showed a maintenance cart parked beside an employee elevator nearly 20 minutes earlier. The cart remained. The worker did not. Claire stared at the screen. Her pulse quickened. Somewhere inside the building, a piece was still missing, and she was becoming increasingly certain that finding it before the signing ceremony began would determine everything. The image on the monitor remained frozen while the room searched for answers. The abandoned maintenance cart sat beside the employee elevator like a forgotten clue waiting to be understood. Nobody knew where the worker had gone. Nobody could explain why the identification badge had been wrong. Nobody except Claire seemed willing to admit that the evening was no longer unfolding according to plan. The supervisor leaned forward and studied the footage again. Run every camera connected to that elevator, he ordered. Screens changed across the room. New angles appeared. Hallways, loading areas, service entrances, storage corridors, the elevator itself. Claire watched carefully. The answer was there somewhere. She could feel it. Then another guard spoke. I found something. Everyone turned toward his screen. A timestamp from earlier in the evening showed the maintenance worker entering the elevator alone. The doors closed. The elevator traveled upward. Then the feed ended. No footage showed him exiting. No footage showed him returning. It was as if he had simply disappeared into the building. The supervisor frowned. That is impossible. Claire quietly shook her head. No. Her eyes remained on the screen. It means we are looking at incomplete information. The room fell silent. She stepped closer to the monitor and traced the elevator route on the building map. The elevator connected directly to multiple employee-only floors. Conference support rooms, technical service areas, administrative offices, places guests never saw, places security rarely worried about during high-profile events because access was already restricted. Claire suddenly stopped. Her finger rested on one location. A small operations suite positioned directly behind the private conference room where the signing ceremony would soon take place. The supervisor followed her gaze. What is there? Network controls, Claire replied. Backup communication systems. Presentation routing. Internal building connections. One of the guards immediately checked the floor plan. His expression changed. She is right. The room became even quieter. Across the ballroom, guests began moving toward the next phase of the evening. Investors gathered in small groups. Assistants organized schedules. Event coordinators guided attendees toward designated areas. Everything appeared smooth. Everything appeared successful. Yet beneath the surface, uncertainty continued spreading. A radio crackled suddenly. Security personnel assigned to the conference level reported an unexpected delay. Not a threat, not an emergency, just a technical issue affecting one of the presentation systems. Another small problem. Another distraction. Claire closed her eyes briefly. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every disruption pointed people away from something else. Every delay consumed attention. Every inconvenience created movement. "He is still ahead of us," she said quietly. The supervisor looked at her. "Who?" Claire opened her eyes. "Whoever planned this." For a moment, nobody responded. Then another guard pointed toward a newly updated access log appearing on his screen. A credential had just been used near the conference support level. Not a guest credential. Not executive staff. Maintenance access. The same category connected to the missing worker. Claire stared at the timestamp. Her pulse quickened. The pieces were no longer forming a pattern. They were forming a destination. And for the first time that night, the entire security team realized they might already be running out of time. The atmosphere inside the command room shifted from concern to urgency. Every monitor seemed brighter. Every radio transmission sounded sharper. The maintenance credential had appeared near the conference support level only minutes before the signing ceremony. That fact alone changed everything. The supervisor immediately began issuing instructions. Teams were reassigned. Additional personnel moved toward the restricted floors. For the first time that evening, the security operation was reacting instead of leading. Claire remained focused on the building map. She listened to the radio traffic without speaking. Years of observing systems had taught her something important. People often rushed toward the most obvious answer. The truth usually hid one layer deeper. "Show me the conference support level," she said quietly. One of the guards pulled up the floor plan. A detailed layout appeared on the screen. Private meeting rooms. Technical support offices. Storage areas. Equipment closets. Emergency access corridors. Claire studied every line. Then her eyes stopped on something small. A narrow service passage connecting two separate sections of the floor. It was barely noticeable. Most people would ignore it completely. "What is that corridor used for?" she asked. A guard checked the documentation. "Mostly maintenance access. Rarely used." Claire nodded slowly. "Rarely used." Another detail that fit the pattern. The person behind the disruptions had avoided crowded areas all evening. They had used service routes, employee elevators, hidden access points, quiet places. The supervisor noticed her expression. "What are you thinking?" Claire looked at the map. "I think everyone assumes the conference room is the destination. Is it not?" Claire hesitated. "I think it is the distraction." The room fell silent. The supervisor stared at her. "Explain." Claire pointed toward the support offices behind the conference suite. If someone wanted access to information, communication systems, schedules, or internal networks, they would not need to enter the conference room itself. Several guards exchanged looks. One of them immediately opened another system diagram. His eyes widened. "The backup presentation servers are here." Another guard added, "Internal communication routing too." The supervisor's expression changed instantly. Suddenly the pieces aligned. The camera failure, the badge, the missing maintenance worker, the false trail leading everyone toward visible locations. It all pointed somewhere quieter, somewhere easier to overlook. A radio transmission interrupted the moment. Security personnel on the conference level had found the maintenance cart. It was parked beside the service passage Claire had identified. Empty. Abandoned. The room became completely silent. Claire felt a chill run through her. Not because of fear, because the pattern had become undeniable. She looked at the digital clock. The signing ceremony was less than 10 minutes away. Across the hotel, guests continued smiling and networking beneath crystal chandeliers. Investors discussed opportunities worth billions of dollars. Ethan Caldwell prepared for the most important meeting of the evening. Almost nobody realized how close they had come to missing what mattered. Then another radio transmission arrived. This one carried a different tone. The team on the conference level had discovered an unlocked access door inside the service corridor. The supervisor slowly turned toward Claire. For the second time that night, Every eye in the room followed her. And for the second time, nobody was laughing. The unlocked door changed everything. Until that moment, the investigation had been built on observations, patterns, and probabilities. Now there was proof. The supervisor immediately ordered the conference level secured while additional personnel moved toward the service corridor. Radio traffic filled the command room. Footsteps echoed through hallways. Screens updated constantly as teams repositioned throughout the hotel. Claire remained focused on the building map. Something still bothered her. The unlocked door explained access. It did not explain purpose. She looked again at the timeline she had constructed in her notebook. The maintenance worker appeared. The camera failed. The distractions multiplied. The credential was used. The service corridor was accessed. Every action followed a sequence. Every sequence served an objective. Across the ballroom, guests continued gathering near the private conference suite. The signing ceremony was only minutes away. Ethan Caldwell stood among investors and advisors, reviewing final documents and exchanging brief conversations. He appeared calm, professional, focused, yet several members of his security detail now watched the room with renewed intensity. The certainty they had carried earlier was gone. One of the guards entered the command room carrying a tablet. "We found something," he said. The supervisor looked up immediately. "What?" The guard placed the tablet on the desk. A maintenance request had been submitted earlier that afternoon. It authorized temporary access to equipment near the conference support offices. Everything appeared legitimate. The problem was simple. The employee listed on the request did not exist. Silence filled the room. Claire stared at the screen. Another piece fell into place. Whoever planned this had not relied on luck. They had relied on preparation. Days of preparation. Maybe weeks. The supervisor slowly exhaled. So the entire thing was arranged in advance. Claire nodded. Yes. Her eyes moved toward the service corridor highlighted on the map. And whoever did it expected security to follow the obvious problems. At that exact moment, a radio transmission arrived from the conference level. The team searching the corridor had discovered a small equipment room connected to the building's internal communication network. Nothing had been damaged. Nothing had been stolen. But several systems had been accessed remotely. The supervisor frowned. Accessed for what? No one answered immediately. Then Claire looked toward the schedule displayed on a nearby monitor. The signing ceremony. The presentations. The investor communications. The secure document transfers. Suddenly she understood. Information, she said quietly. Every eye turned toward her. What? Asked the supervisor. Claire pointed toward the conference suite. This was never about entering the room. Her voice remained calm. It was about everything connected to the room. The realization spread across the command center. The objective had never been disruption. It had never been attention. It had been access. Quiet. Invisible. Easy to miss. The supervisor immediately ordered every connected system reviewed. Teams moved faster. Radios crackled continuously. Yet amid the growing urgency, something unexpected happened. Ethan Caldwell himself entered the command room. The billionaire's eyes moved across the monitors before settling on Claire. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan looked at the supervisor and asked a simple question. Is she the reason you found all of this? The room fell silent once again. For a moment, nobody answered Ethan Caldwell's question. The billionaire stood quietly inside the command room, his attention fixed on Claire. Around them, monitors displayed maps, camera feeds, and system reports. Radios continued transmitting updates from teams throughout the hotel. Yet the room itself felt completely still. The supervisor finally nodded. Yes, he said. We would have missed most of this without her. Ethan looked back at Claire. She seemed uncomfortable with the attention. Her hands rested calmly at her sides. Her server uniform looked exactly the same as it had earlier that evening. Nothing about her appearance explained what had happened. Nothing explained how she had connected details that trained professionals had overlooked. Ethan studied her for several seconds. How? He asked. Claire glanced toward the screens. Patterns. Ethan waited. That cannot be the entire answer. Claire remained silent for a moment. Then she looked at the building map. People focus on events, she said softly. I focus on changes. The room listened carefully. A camera flickers. A badge does not match. A maintenance request appears at the wrong time. Most people see separate problems. I see a sequence. Ethan nodded slowly. The explanation sounded simple. Yet everyone in the room knew it was not. One of the guards pulled up additional records from the hotel's systems. As more information appeared, the picture became clearer. The false maintenance request, the access activity, the unusual routing through service areas. Every new detail supported Claire's observations. The supervisor looked increasingly frustrated. We had every resource available, he admitted. And we still missed it. Claire shook her head gently. You were looking for obvious threats. The supervisor frowned. And what were you looking for? Claire's answer came immediately. Mistakes. Silence followed. Ethan found himself studying her more carefully. There was no arrogance in her voice. No attempt to impress anyone. She spoke the way people spoke when they were describing facts rather than opinions. Across the hotel, the signing ceremony had been temporarily delayed while systems were reviewed. Investors waited patiently. Advisors adjusted schedules. The event remained intact because the problems had been discovered before they could create larger consequences. The realization settled heavily across the room. One observation, then another, then another. A chain of details nobody else considered important had changed the entire evening. Ethan folded his arms. You have done this before. It was not a question. Claire looked away briefly. Through the glass window, she could see the lights of Manhattan glowing beyond the rain-covered skyline. For the first time that night, a shadow crossed her expression. Something old, something painful. A long time ago, she said quietly. Ethan noticed the change immediately. So did everyone else. The supervisor glanced toward one of the analysts working nearby. Without being asked, the analyst began searching public records connected to Claire Whitmore. A few moments later, his eyes widened. Sir, he said softly. The room turned toward him. He looked at Claire, then back at the screen. You should probably see this. Ethan stepped closer. The analyst rotated the monitor. A professional profile appeared on the display. Not for a waitress. Not for a hotel employee. For a former senior security risk analyst who had once advised major corporations on exactly the kind of vulnerabilities they had spent all night trying to understand. The room remained silent as the profile stayed on the screen. Nobody knew what to say. The waitress they had dismissed all evening had once been the very kind of expert they trusted with million-dollar decisions. Claire looked at the monitor only briefly before lowering her eyes. There was no pride in her expression, no satisfaction, just acceptance. Ethan studied the information carefully. Years earlier, Claire Whitmore had worked with major corporations, helping them identify vulnerabilities before they became costly mistakes. Her reports had been respected. Her judgment had been sought after. Then, without explanation, she had disappeared from the industry. The supervisor looked back at Claire. Why did you leave? He asked quietly. Claire glanced toward the rain-covered windows overlooking Manhattan. The city lights shimmered across the glass like distant stars. Because eventually, I stopped wanting to spend my life proving I was right after something went wrong, she said softly. The answer settled over the room. No one pressed further. Some stories did not need details to be understood. Outside the command center, the final system reviews were completed. The conference suite was secured. Communication networks were restored and verified. The signing ceremony proceeded without incident. Investors signed documents. Executives shook hands. The evening concluded successfully. Most guests never learned how close the event had come to being compromised by overlooked details. And that was exactly how Claire preferred it. Nearly an hour later, the ballroom had begun to empty. Staff cleared tables. Chandeliers reflected across polished floors. The storm outside was finally fading. Claire quietly gathered her things near the employee entrance. Her shift was over. She expected to leave the same way she arrived. Unnoticed, Ethan Caldwell appeared beside her before she reached the door. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan extended a small card. My direct number, he said. Claire smiled faintly. I know what that is. Ethan nodded. Then you know I am about to offer you a job. A hint of amusement touched her eyes. Probably. Ethan looked toward the ballroom behind them. Everyone in that room trusted systems. You trusted observation. Everyone saw complexity. You saw patterns. That is rare. Claire glanced at the card but did not take it immediately. I am a waitress. Ethan smiled. No, that is where you work. The words hung gently between them. Claire finally accepted the card. Not because of the opportunity. Not because of the salary. But because for the first time that evening, someone had seen her clearly. Nearby, the supervisor approached. The same man who had laughed at her warnings. He stopped in front of her, and offered a quiet nod. We should have listened. Claire smiled. You did. Eventually. The supervisor laughed softly. This time, everyone did. As Claire stepped into the cool night air, the city felt different somehow. Not because her life had suddenly changed. Not because a billionaire respected her. But because the truth had finally caught up with what she already knew. The quietest people in the room are not always the least important. Sometimes they are simply waiting for others to notice. And if this story reminded you of someone whose wisdom was overlooked until it mattered most, share your thoughts below. Stories like these remind us that dignity does not need to announce itself. And sometimes the people who change everything are the ones nobody sees coming.